The examination hall stretched before me like a cathedral of failure, and I, Velris of House Kenth, was about to add another tally to that particular column. Around me, 43 other students hunched over their data pads, styluses moving with confident precision. Their antennae barely twitched. Their breathing remained steady. They knew their answers. Of course they knew their answers. This was Comparative Xenolinguistics 301, the kind of course you took when you wanted to prove you were intellectually superior to everyone else in your pod. I should never have enrolled. 10 minutes remaining, Professor Tharn announced from the front, her 4 eyes scanning the room with the enthusiasm of someone watching paint dry. She was a Quellan, built like a mantis crossed with a philosophy textbook, and she had exactly 0 patience for students who confused their phonetic drifts with their semantic shifts. I stared at question 17. Again, still, forever. Probably. The question displayed a single character, a curved mark that looked like someone had sneezed ink onto parchment. Below it, the prompt read simply, "Identify this rune." That was it. 2 words. An entire academic career, balanced on 2 words. My translation overlay had been disabled for the exam naturally, because the universe hated me specifically. I squinted at the mark. Was it Centauri? No, too rounded. Definitely not Draxian. Those were all aggressive angles and territorial spacing. Maybe something from the outer reaches. I began to spiral into the special kind of panic reserved for standardized testing and unexpected medical procedures. Then something insane happened. 5 minutes. Tharn intoned, sounding like death itself had learned to express mild disappointment. I did what any desperate student does when facing academic annihilation. I guessed. My stylus hovered over the data pad, ready to mark it as Quellan ceremonial script, and pray to whatever gods might listen, when a voice cut through the silence. "Professor?" Every antenna in the room swiveled. Speaking during an exam was like announcing you had a contagious plague. You simply did not do it. The voice belonged to a creature I had never seen before. She sat 3 rows ahead, and when she turned slightly, I caught my first glimpse of a human. Apparently they had just joined the Galactic Consortium 2 cycles ago. Nobody had bothered to mention this in orientation. Probably because nobody expected them to matter. They were from some backwater planet called Dirt or Ground, or something equally uninspired. Earth? Maybe. The translation matrix hiccuped on the word. She looked soft. Dangerously soft. No scales, no exoskeleton, no protective plating whatsoever. Just this pale, flexible covering that seemed about as useful as decorative tissue paper. Her hair, an unnatural shade of red that could not possibly be natural, was tied back in some kind of binding. 2 eyes positioned forward like a predator, unsettling. Professor Tharn's mandibles clicked in irritation. "This is an examination, Cadet Reeves. Silence is mandatory." "I understand, Professor," the human said, her voice carrying a strange musical quality that our translation devices struggled to properly render. "But I need clarification on question 17. The room held its breath, or whatever equivalent applied to the 37 different species present. The question," Tharn said slowly, as if explaining basic concepts to a particularly dim lava, "is self-explanatory. Identify the rune." "In which context?" the human asked. "Silence. The kind of silence that usually preceded someone getting expelled or possibly vaporized." "Excuse me," Tharn said, her tone dropping several degrees below freezing. "Cadet Reeves," because apparently humans had names that sounded like occupational hazards, gestured at her datapad. "The rune shown is Calexian script, but Calexian evolved differently depending on usage context. That specific character means water, ritual contexts, advance in military communications, and longing in personal correspondence." "So, which context are you asking about? Ritual, military, or personal letter?" The silence somehow got louder. I looked at my datapad, looked at the rune, looked back at the human. She was right. Holy gods of the 17 moons. She was absolutely right. I could see it now, the subtle curve that could bend 3 different ways depending on intentionality. How had I missed that? How had anyone missed that? Professor Tharn's antenna began to vibrate, which in Quellan body language meant something between profound confusion and suppressed rage. The question asks you to identify the Rune, cadet, not to provide a dissertation on contextual linguistics. But identification requires context, Reeves pressed, and I realized with mounting horror and fascination that she was actually arguing with Professor Tharn during an exam. If I identify it as the military variant when you meant the ritual one, my answer would be marked incorrect, despite demonstrating comprehensive knowledge of the symbol system. That seems pedagogically counterproductive. Someone in the back row made a sound like a slowly deflating air bladder. I think they were having some kind of medical episode. The context, Tharn said, each word arriving like a small explosion, is academic. This is an academic examination. Provide an academic answer. Academic context would require discussing all three variants with supporting evidence from primary sources, the human replied, with the kind of cheerful helpfulness that made me want to hide under my desk, which would exceed the character limit for the answer field. Should I submit an attached document, or would you prefer a condensed summary hitting the key differentiation points? I can do either, but I want to make sure I am following your preferred format. Professor Tharn's eyes began to glow faintly, which was never a good sign. Cadet Reeves, are you attempting to be difficult? No, Professor, I am attempting to be precise, the human smiled, revealing flat white teeth that should not have been threatening but somehow absolutely were. My species has a saying, measure twice, cut once. I would rather clarify expectations now than submit an incorrect answer based on faulty assumptions. This was incredible. This was a disaster. This was the most entertainment I had experienced since enrolling in this nightmare institution. Tharn's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound like dice being shaken in a cup. Finally she spoke. The context is ritual. Thank you, Professor, Reeves said brightly, turning back to her datapad. The exam continued. Sort of. I mean, we all pretended to work on our remaining questions, but really everyone was thinking about what had just happened. The new species, the prey-looking ones with their soft skin and forward-facing eyes, had just backed Professor Tharn into a rhetorical corner. Over a rune. Time expired. We submitted our datapads, filed out in the traditional awkward shuffle of students who were either confident or completely broken by the experience. I caught up with the human in the corridor outside. That was either brilliantly insane or insanely brilliant, I said, my translation device hopefully rendering the idiom correctly. She turned, those predator eyes focusing on me with unnerving intensity. Up close she was even stranger. Her face moved in dozens of tiny ways, expressing things my people needed full body language to communicate. Oh, you mean the question? Yeah, that was driving me nuts. Did you notice the line weight variation? Dead giveaway for Calexian ritual script, but without the context flag you could argue any of the three meanings. You just challenged Professor Tharn, I said, in front of 44 witnesses. She is going to make your life a living nightmare. Reeves shrugged, her shoulders rising and falling in a gesture my anatomy could not replicate. Maybe, but I am not here to memorize answers. I am here to learn how to actually read this stuff. If that means asking uncomfortable questions, so be it. She paused. I am Kira, by the way, Kira Reeves. Velris, I managed, House Kenth, third spawn, mediocre grades. She laughed. The sound was bizarre, rhythmic and breathy, but somehow warm. Sounds like we will get along fine. Walk with me. I want to hit the archive before interspecies diplomatic protocol. I need to verify something about Trebian possessive markers. I had no idea what Trebian possessive markers were. I followed anyway. This, I realized with dawning certainty, was going to be interesting. The archive turned out to be less of a library and more of a three-dimensional maze designed by someone who hated both organization and happiness. Holographic texts floated in clusters, sorting themselves by language family, chronological period, and some third category that might have been smell for all I could tell. Kira moved through it like she had memorized the chaos, her hands swiping through displays with practiced efficiency. Here, she muttered, pulling up a manuscript that looked approximately 10,000 cycles old. See this? The marker shows possession, but the emotional weight context is missing from every translation I have found. I peered at the glowing text. It looked like ancient Trebian, which was known for being impossible to translate without invoking at least 3 gods and a specialized neural implant. How can you even read this? Practice, she said absently, scrolling through another section. My planet has about 7,000 different languages, so we get used to pattern recognition early. Plus, humans are really good at finding meaning in incomplete information. Evolutionary advantage from when we were hunting megafauna with pointy sticks, probably. You hunted what with what now? She glanced up, grinning. Big dangerous animals with crude weapons. Before we invented agriculture, we basically chased things until they collapsed from exhaustion, then stabbed them. Persistence predators. Fun times. I stared at her, at this small, soft creature, who claimed her species ran animals to death. You are joking. Nope. Humans are terrifying if you think about it too hard. Best not to, honestly. She returned to the manuscript. Anyway, this possessive marker has an implied emotional context that everyone keeps missing. It is not just my hunting spear, it is my hunting spear that I made with my father before he died, and now it carries both our honors. See the difference? I did not, but I nodded anyway. The problem with most xenolinguistic study, Kira continued, warming to her subject in a way that suggested I was in for a lecture, is that people treat languages like mathematical codes. Input word, receive output meaning. But language is not math. It is culture, history, emotion, identity, all wrapped up in sound and symbol. You cannot just translate words, you have to translate entire worldviews. Is that why you asked about context? I ventured. Exactly. She beamed at me like I had just discovered fire. That rune does not exist in isolation. It exists in a web of meaning that changes based on who is writing it, why they are writing it, and who they expect to read it. Strip away the context, and you are not testing language skills, you are testing memorization. From somewhere behind a floating shelf, a voice called out, "Could you humans possibly discuss your theories more quietly? Some of us are attempting actual research." Kira rolled her eyes, a gesture that involved rotating her entire eyeball in its socket like some kind of biological gimbal. "Sorry," she called back, not sounding sorry at all. She lowered her voice to what she probably thought was a whisper. "Anyway, want to help me cross-reference this with the Mandex Codex? I think there is a connection nobody has noticed." "Why would I do that? I barely passed last semester." "Because," Kira said, her smile taking on a slightly mischievous quality, "learning stuff is way more fun when you are not doing it alone. Plus, I am buying lunch after human food. You ever had pizza?" I had not. I had no idea what pizza was. It sounded vaguely threatening. "Sure," I heard myself say. And that was how I accidentally became friends with the most dangerous student in comparative xenolinguistics. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of ancient texts, linguistic theories, and Kira explaining human idioms that made absolutely no sense. Apparently they had sayings like "break a leg" that meant good luck, and "piece of cake" that meant something was easy, despite cake being food and not a measure of difficulty. By the time we left the archive, my head was spinning with possessive markers, contextual frameworks, and the growing realization that I had learned more in 3 hours with Kira than in 3 weeks of lectures. "So," I said as we walked toward the dining complex, "what made you want to study xenolinguistics? It is not exactly the most popular field." Kira was quiet for a moment, her expression shifting into something more thoughtful. "When humans first made contact with the consortium, we almost started a war because of a translation error. Someone rendered our greeting as a declaration of territorial challenge. Took 6 months of frantic diplomacy to sort out that we were just saying hello." She shook her head. "Language shapes reality. Get it wrong and people die. Get it right and maybe we all figure out how to coexist." Seemed worth studying. That was, I had to admit, a significantly better reason than my spawning parent made me, or I needed the credits. We reached the dining complex, a massive structure that attempted to accommodate the dietary requirements of roughly 200 different species. It smelled like burning sulfur and overcooked vegetables having an argument. Kira led me to a small vendor stall that advertised human cuisine, probably safe for most biologies. The vendor, another human with dark skin and a suspicious expression, looked up as we approached. "Kira," he said. "Who is your friend?" "This is Velris. Velris. Meet Marcus. He makes the best pizza this side of the Andromeda cluster." "I make the only pizza this side of the Andromeda cluster," Marcus corrected. "What do you want?" "2 slices. Surprise us." Marcus grunted and turned to his preparation surface, doing things with dough and sauce that seemed unnecessarily complicated for food. "So," I said carefully, "what exactly is pizza?" Kira's face lit up like someone had activated a small sun behind her eyes. "Oh, you are in for a treat. It is like okay, imagine bread, but flat. Then add sauce made from crushed tomatoes. Then add cheese, which is congealed milk protein." That sounds horrifying. I know, right? But trust me, it is amazing. Humans figured out that if you take ingredients that sound disgusting and combine them in the right way, you get something incredible. Kind of a metaphor for our whole approach to life, honestly. Marcus slid 2 plates across the counter. On each sat a triangular section of the flatbread Kira had described, covered in red sauce and melted yellowish substance, with various other items scattered across the top. I stared at it. It stared back, steaming gently. "Go on," Kira urged. "Try it." I picked up the triangle, which was hot and floppy, and threatened to deposit its toppings onto my feet. Carefully, I took a bite. Flavor exploded across my taste receptors like a small, delicious bomb. "Oh," I said, inadequately. "Oh, this is..." "Told you," Kira said smugly, already halfway through her own slice. We ate in companionable silence for a moment, and I realized something that should have been obvious from the start. Humans were terrifying not because they were physically impressive. They were terrifying because they asked questions nobody thought to ask, found connections nobody thought existed, and turned disasters into triumphs through sheer stubborn creativity. Also, they had pizza. "Hey Kira," I said, licking sauce off my fingers in a way that was probably undignified. "Thanks. For today. I actually enjoyed learning for once." She grinned. "Any time. Besides, semester just started. We have got plenty more opportunities to drive Professor Tharn completely insane." I should have been worried about that. Instead, I found myself looking forward to it. Somewhere in the distance a bell chimed, signaling the end of the break period. Students began filing toward their next classes, a river of different species moving through the corridors. Kira stood, collecting our plates. "Come on, we have got interspecies diplomatic protocol next. I hear the professor is demonstrating proper greeting rituals. Should be hilarious." "Why would that be hilarious?" Her smile was pure mischief. "Because apparently nobody told him that the human handshake looks exactly like the Vorgian mating challenge. This is going to be educational." I followed her toward the classroom, feeling something I had not felt since arriving at this institution. Hope. And maybe just a little bit of fear. Mostly hope, though. The human was going to change everything. I could feel it. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen, but at least it would not be boring. And in an academic institution dedicated to the study of alien languages, boring was the real enemy. We reached the classroom door. Kira paused, her hand on the entry panel. "Ready?" she asked. I thought about Professor Tharn's furious mandible, clicking, about the rune with 3 meanings, about pizza and persistence hunting and running animals to death with pointy sticks. "Absolutely not," I said. "Perfect," Kira replied, and we walked in together. The interspecies diplomatic protocol classroom was designed by someone who clearly believed discomfort promoted learning. Seats adjusted themselves to accommodate different body types, but always seemed to get the height wrong by exactly enough to be annoying. The temperature regulated itself based on the average comfort zone of all species present, which meant everyone was equally miserable. Professor Grask stood at the front, a Vorgian whose species looked like someone had crossed a bear with a filing cabinet, and given it anger management issues. He was approximately twice my height and built like a military transport vehicle. "Today," he rumbled, his voice coming through the translation matrix with the texture of grinding stone, "we will examine physical greeting protocols across consortium species. Misunderstandings in this area have caused 17 documented conflicts and approximately 400 minor diplomatic incidents." Kira leaned over to me, her voice barely a whisper. "This is going to be good." "How do you know?" "Because I read ahead. Trust me." Professor Grask activated a holographic display showing various species engaged in different greeting behaviors. Antenna, touching, scent exchange. Elaborate dance sequences that looked exhausting. Each culture develops greetings based on their evolutionary history and social structure. Understanding these rituals prevents accidental offense. His multiple eyes scanned the room and landed on Kira with the precision of a targeting system. "Cadet Reeves, as our newest species representative, perhaps you could demonstrate the standard human greeting." I felt Kira tense beside me. Not with fear, I realized, with anticipation. "Of course, Professor," she said, standing smoothly. She walked to the front of the classroom, her movement fluid and controlled. Every eye, antenna and sensory organ in the room tracked her progress. "The standard human greeting," Kira began, her tone perfectly professional, "varies by culture and context. However, the most common formal greeting in diplomatic settings is the handshake." She extended her right hand, palm vertical, fingers together. One person extends their hand like this. The other person grasps it, and both move their joined hands up and down briefly. Usually 2 or 3 times. The grip should be firm but not crushing, and eye contact is maintained throughout. Professor Grask stared at her extended hand. His facial plates shifted in a way that might have been confusion or possibly indigestion. "And this gesture signifies what exactly?" "Peaceful intent, mutual respect and social recognition," Kira explained. "The origins are debated, but one theory suggests it evolved from demonstrating that neither party was holding a weapon." "Fascinating," Grask said slowly. His eyes were doing something complicated. "And you perform this gesture with all species?" "Generally, yes. Unless informed otherwise." "Why?" The professor's facial plates shifted again, this time definitely indicating suppressed emotion. Behind him, the holographic display flickered and changed, showing a Vorgian standing with one arm extended, hand open. "Because," Grask said carefully, "in Vorgian culture, that exact gesture is how males challenge each other for mating rights." The classroom went silent, the kind of silence that usually preceded something exploding or catching fire. Kira looked at the display, looked at her extended hand, looked back at the professor. Then she started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, not a nervous giggle, a full genuine laugh that echoed off the walls and made her entire body shake. "Oh no," she managed between gasps. "Oh, this explains so much. The trade delegation last month. The weird looks. That one ambassador, who kept backing away from our Secretary of State." Several other students began making sounds that their species equivalent of laughter. Even Professor Grask's facial plates arranged themselves into something that might have been amusement. "Yes," he said dryly. "I imagine your Secretary of State was quite confused about why the Vorgian ambassador seemed so hostile." "Hostile?" Kira wiped at her eyes, which had started leaking water. "Apparently that happened when humans laughed hard enough. He thought he was being challenged to ritual combat for mating rights by a 70-year-old grandmother. She probably just wanted to establish diplomatic relations. Indeed, this is precisely why this course exists, Cadet Reeves. Small gestures carry enormous weight." Kira nodded, composing herself. "So, what is the appropriate Vorgian greeting?" We touch facial plates together briefly while making a low humming sound. It signifies trust, as it leaves both parties vulnerable. "That is actually kind of beautiful," Kira said thoughtfully. "Can I try, without the accidental mating challenge this time?" Professor Grask made a sound like grinding rocks that might have been approval. He leaned down and Kira carefully touched her forehead to his facial plate, attempting a low hum that her anatomy was clearly not designed to produce. It sounded like a broken ventilation system. The professor straightened, his expression almost gentle. Adequate effort, cadet. Please return to your seat. As Kira walked back, I noticed something had shifted in the room. The other students were looking at her differently now. Not with the suspicion reserved for newcomers, but with something approaching respect. She had turned a potential embarrassment into a teaching moment, laughed at herself, and genuinely tried to learn. She dropped into her seat beside me, still grinning. Told you it would be good. You knew about the mating challenge thing? Read about it last night. Figured it would come up eventually. Might as well address it head on. She paused. No pun intended. The lecture continued, covering 17 more species and their various greeting protocols. There was the Quillianti nose touch, which looked painfully awkward. The Drazen wing flutter, which required appendages most species did not possess. The Catherine silence, which involved standing completely still for 30 seconds, and apparently conveyed deep philosophical respect. Halfway through a demonstration of Mercurian scent marking, which involved glands I definitely did not have, the classroom door opened. A figure entered, and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. It was another human, male, wearing what I had learned was called a military uniform. His posture screamed authority and danger in equal measure. Sharp eyes scanned the room with tactical precision. "Professor Grask," he said, his voice carrying the kind of command that made you stand straighter without thinking about it. "I need to borrow Cadet Reeves. Official matter." Kira's expression went carefully neutral. "Colonel Vance." "Cadet, with me, now." She stood, gathering her datapad. As she passed my desk, she muttered, "If I am not back in an hour, assume I got court-martialed for the Tharn thing." Then she was gone, following the colonel out into the corridor. The door closed. Professor Grask stared at it for a moment, then continued his lecture as if nothing had happened. But I could not focus. Something about that exchange felt wrong. The hour ticked by with agonizing slowness. Grask demonstrated the proper way to bow to a Centauri diplomat, without accidentally insulting their entire family line. He explained why you should never pat a Quillan on the head, as they interpreted it as a declaration of war. He showed us the 17 different ways to nod agreement in Trebian culture, each with subtly different meanings. Kira did not return. When class ended, I gathered my things slowly, debating. It was not my business, we had just met. Whatever was happening with the colonel was clearly official military business that had nothing to do with me. I made it approximately 15 meters down the corridor before my curiosity defeated my common sense. Finding them was surprisingly easy. I just followed the sound of raised voices coming from one of the small conference rooms near the administration wing. The door was not quite closed, and I absolutely should not have stopped to listen. I stopped anyway. "Cannot keep questioning everything, Reeves," the colonel was saying. "You are making waves that do not need to be made." I questioned one exam question because it was poorly constructed, Kira's voice tight with controlled frustration. "That is not making waves. That is basic academic integrity. You challenged a professor in front of an entire class. Do you have any idea how that looks? Humans have been in the consortium for exactly 2 cycles. We are still proving ourselves, still showing that we belong here, and you are making us look difficult." "No, sir, respectfully. I am making us look like we care about getting things right. There is a difference." A pause. I pressed closer to the door, my auditory organs straining. "The consortium operates on certain social rules, cadet. Hierarchy. Respect. Not making your superiors look incompetent in public forums." Professor Tharn looked incompetent because she wrote an incompetent question. "That is not on me. Everything you do reflects on humanity. Every word, every action, every decision. We are under constant evaluation. If you cannot understand that, then maybe you should not be here." Silence. Long and heavy. When Kira spoke again, her voice was quieter but somehow more dangerous. "With respect, Colonel, humanity did not crawl up from caves and build starships by keeping quiet when something was wrong. We asked uncomfortable questions. We challenged assumptions. We looked at the universe and said, what if there is a better way? And yeah, that made people uncomfortable, but it also made us who we are." This is not Earth, Cadet. No, sir, it is not. But I am still human. And if being human means occasionally asking questions that need asking, even when they are inconvenient, then that is what I am going to do. Another pause. Then footsteps approaching the door. I moved with speed I did not know I possessed, sliding around a corner just as the door opened fully. Colonel Vance emerged, his expression carved from stone. He walked past my hiding spot without noticing me. Kira followed a moment later, her face showing no emotion at all. That was somehow more concerning than if she had been angry or upset. She spotted me immediately. "How much did you hear?" "Enough," I admitted. "Are you in trouble?" "Probably. But I will be in more trouble if I keep standing here talking about it." She started walking, and I fell into step beside her. "Want to help me do something potentially career-ending?" "That depends. How potentially are we talking?" "Scale of 1 to 10? Probably a 7. "What is a 10? "Stealing a starship." "And what is this?" She pulled out her data pad, showing me a screen full of incomprehensible symbols. "Remember how I said the Trebian possessive markers were being mistranslated? Well, I think I know why. And if I am right, there is a whole section of the Galactic Historical Archive that has been completely misunderstood for about 300 cycles." I stared at the screen. At her. "You want to correct 3 centuries of academic consensus?" "I want to check if I am right. If I am, then yes, someone needs to correct it. Might as well be me." This was insane. This was the kind of thing that got you expelled, blacklisted, possibly exiled to some remote mining station where the only entertainment was watching rocks do nothing. "What do you need me to do?" I heard myself ask. Her smile was pure sunshine. "I need someone who can access the Kent family historical records. Your house is one of the oldest in the consortium, right? You guys have original texts dating back to first contact." "Yes, but those are restricted. Only family members and approved researchers can view them." "Good thing you are a family member then." "Kira, I cannot just waltz into the family archives and start pulling classified documents." "Why not?" "Because I am the third spawn. I am not important. I barely have clearance to use the bathroom without supervision." She tilted her head, studying me with those unsettling predator eyes. "You know what I think. I think you are way more capable than you give yourself credit for. You followed my entire argument about contextual linguistics this afternoon. You picked up on the possessive marker thing immediately, and you are standing here having just eavesdropped on a private conversation, asking how you can help instead of running away. That just makes me nosy and possibly stupid." "No, that makes you curious and brave, and those are exactly the qualities I need right now." I should have said no. Any reasonable person would have said no. "The archives close in 2 hours," I said. "We would have to move fast." Kira's grin could have powered a small sun. Fast is what humans do best. The Kent family archives occupied a wing of the central library that most students did not even know existed. My family had been part of the consortium since its founding, which meant we had accumulated approximately 12,000 cycles worth of documents, artifacts and historical records that nobody had looked at in generations. The entrance required biometric scanning. I pressed my primary manipulator against the panel, trying to look confident despite my internal organs attempting to relocate themselves to different parts of my body. Identity confirmed. Velris, House Kent, 3rd spawn. Clearance level 4. Purpose of visit. Historical research. I managed. Academic project. Accompanied by. Kira stepped forward. Cadet Kira Reeves, human exchange student. Xenolinguistics department. I am assisting with translation work. The security system hummed. Processing. For a horrible moment, I thought it would reject us. Then the door opened with a soft hiss. Access granted. Please remember that flash photography is prohibited and original documents must be handled with appropriate care. We stepped inside. The archive stretched before us like a cathedral dedicated to the worship of information. Shelves reached toward a ceiling lost in shadows, filled with data crystals, bound manuscripts, holographic storage units, and things I could not even identify. The air tasted old, flavored with dust and important secrets. "Okay," Kira whispered, her voice carrying despite the attempt at quiet. "We need texts from around the Trebian contact period. First century of the Consortium, specifically anything dealing with trade agreements or cultural exchange. That could be thousands of documents. Then we better start looking." We split up, moving through the stacks. I headed for the historical section, while Kira went toward diplomatic records. The archives organization system made sense if you had been trained in it from spawning, which I had not been. I was pretty sure third spawns were not supposed to need this information. 15 minutes of searching produced nothing useful. 20 minutes brought me to a section labeled Restricted Access, Special Permission Required. 30 minutes found me standing in front of a locked case containing what looked like original Trebian manuscripts. "Kira," I hissed. "I found something, but it is locked." She appeared beside me with the kind of silence that reminded me humans were persistent predators. "Can you open it?" "Not without triggering every security alert in the building." She examined the lock, pulling out a small device from her pocket. "What if we do not exactly open it?" "What is that?" "Technically, it is a linguistic translation probe. Unofficially, it is a really sophisticated scanner that can read through transparent surfaces." She grinned. "We are not breaking in. We are just reading through the glass. Totally different thing." "That is the worst legal logic I have ever heard." "Thank you. Now hold this." She handed me her datapad and pressed the device against the case. Immediately holographic text began appearing in the air, showing the contents of the manuscripts inside. "There," she breathed. "Look at that marker. See how it has been translated as simple possession. But the emotional context marker is right there, clear as day. This is not saying our trade agreement. It is saying our trade agreement that we made despite fear, because building trust matters more than comfort." I looked at the symbols floating in the air. She was right. It was so obvious once you saw it, but centuries of translators had missed it because they were looking for literal meanings instead of emotional weight. "This changes everything," I said quietly. "If the early trade agreements were about building trust despite fear, not just exchanging goods, then the entire foundation of the consortium is different than what we have been taught." "Exactly. The consortium was not built on cold economic logic. It was built on species being scared but choosing connection anyway." Kira was grinning like she had just discovered a new planet. "This is huge, Velris. This is rewrite the history books huge. This is also get us expelled huge." Details. The sound echoed through the archives. Footsteps, moving with purpose. We froze. "Someone's coming," I whispered. "We need to leave. Now." Kira quickly deactivated her scanner, the holographic text vanishing. We moved away from the restricted case, trying to look casual, which is impossible to do when your body language is screaming guilt and panic. A figure emerged from between the shelves. My spawning mother, High Archivist Kent Vel, regarded us with the expression of someone who had seen every possible variation of poor decision-making and was not impressed by any of them. "Velris," she said calmly. "Third spawn, would you care to explain why you are in the restricted section with unauthorized scanning equipment?" My mouth opened. Nothing came out. My brain had apparently decided to take an early retirement. Kira stepped forward. "That was me, Archivist Kent Vel. I asked Velris to help me verify a translation hypothesis. I take full responsibility for any protocol violations." My mother's gaze shifted to Kira, evaluating her with the intensity of someone who had spent 12,000 cycles learning to spot truth from deception. "You are the human. The one who challenged Professor Tharn." "Yes, ma'am. Cadet Kira Reeves. And you believe you have found an error in the historical translations?" "Not an error, exactly. More like a missing dimension. The translators were not wrong. They just did not have the framework to understand emotional context markers in Trebian script." My mother was silent for a long moment. Then she walked to the locked case, entered a code and opened it. She pulled out one of the manuscripts with care bordering on reverence. "Show me," she said. Kira glanced at me, surprise clear on her face. I could only shrug. My spawning mother was famously unpredictable, which was probably why she had risen to High Archivist despite being from a minor family branch. Kira pulled out her scanner again, this time with permission. She highlighted the markers in question, explaining the contextual framework, showing how the emotional weight changed the entire meaning of the texts. My mother listened without interrupting. When Kira finished, she carefully placed the manuscript back in its case. "You are correct," she said finally. "I noticed these patterns 40 cycles ago when I first began working with the Trebian documents. I wrote a paper proposing the emotional context hypothesis. It was rejected by every major academic journal. The reviewers said I was projecting feelings onto symbols that were clearly meant to be literal." "That is ridiculous," Kira said hotly. "Anyone with basic training in contextual linguistics can see the markers." "Yes, but acknowledging them would require rewriting centuries of established interpretation. It would mean admitting that some of our fundamental understanding of consortium history is incomplete. Academic institutions do not enjoy being told they are incomplete." She closed the case, locking it with deliberate precision. "Which is why I'm going to do something unprecedented. I am going to sponsor your research, Cadet Reeves. Both of you. You will have full access to the Kent archives under my direct supervision. You will write a comprehensive paper documenting these contextual markers, and you will present your findings at the Consortium Xenolinguistics Symposium next cycle." I stared at my spawning mother. "But that is the most prestigious academic conference in the galaxy. They do not let students present. They do if the student is sponsored by a high archivist and has genuinely groundbreaking research." She looked at Kira with something approaching approval. "Your species is either brilliantly insightful or dangerously disruptive, possibly both. But you ask the right questions, and that matters more than comfort." Kira's face was doing complicated things. "Thank you, archivist. I do not know what to say. Say you will do the work properly. Say you will document everything with academic rigor. Say you will make them listen because your research is too solid to ignore." My mother's expression softened slightly. "And say you will teach my third spawn how to have some confidence. He is smarter than he believes." Then she turned and walked away, leaving us standing in the archives with permission to change history. Kira looked at me. I looked at her. "Your mom is terrifying," she said. "I know. I like her." "Yeah, me too." We stood there for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling over us like a comfortable blanket made of responsibility. "So," Kira said eventually, "want to rewrite consortium history?" I thought about Professor Tharn's clicking mandibles, about contextual markers and emotional weight, about humans who asked uncomfortable questions and chased prey animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. I thought about my spawning mother saying I was smarter than I believed. "Absolutely," I said. And somewhere in the archives around us, centuries of carefully preserved knowledge seemed to hum with approval.